The year is 1952. You are standing on a beach in Washington state, looking out at the cold waters of Puget Sound. A massive freighter is anchored offshore. Suddenly, the water begins to boil and churn. A dark shape emerges from the waves. At first, it looks like a landing craft, a flat-bottomed boat pushing through the surf, but as it gets closer to the shore, it doesn't stop. It keeps rising. Out of the water come 4 massive black tires. They are 9 feet tall. They dwarf the soldiers standing on the beach. The machine roars onto the sand, shaking the earth, carrying a fully loaded Sherman tank in its cargo bay as if it were a child's toy. This is not a boat, and it is not a truck. It is the BARC, the barge, Amphibious Resupply, Cargo, later renamed the LARC-LX. It was a 100-ton steel leviathan. It remains the largest, heaviest, and most bizarre amphibious vehicle ever successfully deployed by the United States Army. It was a machine that defied the boundaries between the ocean and the land. This is the story of the sea tractor that rolled on 9-foot tires and the engineering madness required to make 100 tons of steel swim. To understand why the U.S. Army needed a monster of this size, you have to look back at the brutal lessons of World War II and the Korean War. During amphibious assaults, like Normandy or Incheon, the military had a massive logistical problem. Bringing troops to the beach was hard enough, but bringing heavy equipment like tanks, bulldozers, and locomotives was a nightmare. Traditional landing craft had to ram into the beach, drop a ramp, and hope the vehicles could drive through the soft sand. Often they couldn't. They sank. The beach would become a bottleneck of trapped equipment, making them easy targets for enemy artillery. The Army needed a vehicle that could act as a lighter, driving onto a transport ship, loading a 60-ton tank, floating to the shore, and then simply driving up the beach and inland, dropping the cargo on solid ground. They needed a boat with wheels, but a boat capable of carrying 60 tons of cargo needs to be huge, and wheels capable of supporting 160 tons of combined weight on soft sand needed to be colossal. The Army turned to the Pacific Car and Foundry Company, but the real genius behind the propulsion and wheel design was a man named R.G. Letourneau. Letourneau was the Willy Wonka of heavy earth-moving machinery. He believed in electric drive and massive proportions. When he was asked to help design the wheels for the BARC, he didn't hold back. The vehicle that emerged from the blueprints was 60 feet long, 26 feet wide, and nearly 20 feet tall. Empty, it weighed almost 100 tons. But the most striking feature was the tires. Firestone had to invent them specifically for this machine. They were the largest tires in the world at the time, standing 9 feet tall and over 3 feet wide. To prevent them from sinking into the sand, the driver could inflate or deflate them from the cabin while moving, adjusting the tire pressure to match the terrain. Powering this beast was an engineering challenge of its own. You couldn't just put one truck engine in a 100-ton amphibian, so the engineers used 4. The LARC-LX was equipped with 4 separate 265-horsepower GMC diesel engines. They were housed in the side walls of the vehicle. Here is where the engineering gets brilliant. Each engine drove one specific wheel. If one engine failed, the vehicle could keep going on 3. If 2 failed, it could limp on 2. This gave the massive machine an incredible level of redundancy. In the water, 2 of the engines were diverted to power 2 massive marine propellers at the rear. Steering the LARC-LX was a bizarre experience because it had 4 independent wheels. It had 4-wheel steering. The driver could turn the front wheels one way and the rear wheels the other, allowing this 60-foot monster to turn around in a circle no wider than its own length. Or the driver could turn all 4 wheels in the same direction, allowing the 100-ton barge to drive sideways, crabbing up the beach like a giant metal crustacean. Operating the LARC was a loud, hot and slow job. On land, its top speed was a blistering 15 miles per hour. In the water, it pushed through the waves at 7 miles per hour. The driver sat in a small cab perched on the port side of the bow. From up there, the blind spots were massive. The driver couldn't see anything directly in front of the starboard side, so a crew member had to stand on the deck, communicating via a headset, acting as a spotter. The first prototype was tested in 1952, and it was a massive success. The sight of a boat driving straight out of the water and down a highway stopped traffic. The army was thrilled. They eventually ordered 60 of these giants. Their true test came during the Vietnam War. In the 1960s, the US military was pouring millions of tons of supplies into South Vietnam, but the country lacked deep-water ports. Ships had to anchor miles offshore. The LARC-LX became the ultimate workhorse. They swam out to the freighters, loaded up with everything from ammunition to bulldozers, and churned through the surf onto the pristine beaches of Cam Ranh Bay. They were unstoppable. They didn't care if the tide was out. They didn't care if the beach was made of soft, sinking mud. The 9-foot tires, combined with the immense torque of 4 diesel engines, allowed the LARC to conquer terrain that would swallow a conventional truck. They were even used to rescue smaller landing craft that had gotten stuck in the sand. A LARC would simply drive up, hook a chain to the stranded boat, and drag it into the water using sheer brute force. But like all giants, the LARC-LX eventually found itself outpaced by evolution. As the Cold War progressed, the nature of warfare changed. The military began to rely heavily on helicopters, like the Chinook, which could sling-load cargo directly from ships to inland bases, flying right over the beaches. Furthermore, the Navy developed the LCAC, the Landing Craft Air Cushion. These were massive hovercrafts that could travel at over 40 knots, skimming over the water and onto the beach in a fraction of the time it took the slow, lumbering LARC to make the same trip. The era of the sea tractor was coming to an end. Speed had replaced brute force. In 2001, after nearly 50 years of service, the United States Army finally retired the last of the LARC-LX fleet. Many were sold for scrap. A few were bought by private companies for heavy hauling in swampy terrain, but the massive fuel consumption and maintenance costs made them impractical for civilian use. Today, only a handful of these magnificent monsters survive. Most of them are sitting quietly in military museums across the United States. They sit on the concrete, their black paint fading, their massive tires slowly cracking in the sun. Visitors walk past them, staring up at wheels that are taller than they are, struggling to comprehend the sheer scale of the machine. They are relics of a time when the solution to a logistical problem was simply to build the biggest, heaviest, most unstoppable piece of steel imaginable. The LARC-LX wasn't fast, it wasn't beautiful, but it did exactly what it was designed to do. It conquered the gap between the ocean and the earth. Thanks for watching Iron Legacy. If you enjoyed this story of the ultimate American beach monster, hit the subscribe button and let me know in the comments. If you had to choose a vehicle to survive a flood, would you want a modern hovercraft or the slow, indestructible steel walls of the LARC-LX? See you in the next one.